People often think of a courtroom as a place of judgment, a place where mistakes are tallied and prices are paid. But after sitting on this bench for over 4 decades, I've learned it's something else entirely. It's a place where life spills over. Files and police reports give you the cold, hard facts: speeding, parking tickets, expired registrations. But they never tell you the story behind the violation. They don't tell you about the sleepless nights, the empty bank accounts, or the desperate race against time that so many people are running. Some mornings before I even walk through those double doors, I can feel that the day is going to hold something heavier than usual. Before I go any further into this story, let me ask you for a quick favor. If you believe that compassion is just as important as the law, and if stories about real human struggle and kindness matter to you, hit that subscribe button. Leave me a comment telling me where you're watching from. The case I want to tell you about today involved a father, but really it's a story about anyone who has ever tried to keep their head above water when the tide is rising. My mornings have a rhythm that hasn't changed much in 40 years. I wake up while the house is still quiet before the noise of the city starts to creep in. My wife says she can tell what kind of day it's going to be just by the way I tie my tie. I drink my coffee the same way I always have: strong black, no sugar. Christina, my clerk, knows the routine better than anyone. By the time I step into my chambers, the steam is usually rising from the cup on my desk. It's a small moment of peace, and I cherish it, because once I put on that robe, the peace is often replaced by the problems of the world. My father used to tell me something that I carry with me every single day. He'd say, "Frank, a man's dignity is the only thing he truly owns. If you take that away from him in front of others, you've taken everything." He believed that authority wasn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It was about being the one who listens the closest. That morning I arrived at the courthouse around 8:15. The corridors were already buzzing with the usual mix of lawyers, officers, and nervous citizens clutching their citations. I walked into my chambers and began to scan the docket. On paper it looked like an ordinary Tuesday. A list of parking violations, some red light tickets, a few speeding cases, nothing that screamed emergency. But as I've said before, the paper only tells you the what. It doesn't tell you the who. As I reviewed the names, I felt that familiar instinct kicking in, that quiet voice telling me to pay attention. Court began and the room was packed. I took my seat and looked out at the gallery. I saw the usual faces: people checking their watches, people scrolling on their phones, people looking annoyed that they had to take time off work. But then my eyes stopped on a man sitting near the back row. He looked different. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't looking around. He was staring at the floor, his elbows resting on his knees, his head in his hands. He was wearing a faded work uniform, the kind with a name patch that had started to fray at the edges. His boots were covered in dust like he had come straight from a job site. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in his shoulders. He looked like a man who was holding up the sky and was about to buckle under the weight. I made a mental note to watch him closely. In this line of work, you learn to read body language. Defiance looks one way, arms crossed, chin up. Boredom looks another, but this was exhaustion, pure bone-deep exhaustion. When Christina finally called his name, "Mr. Miller," I saw him flinch. He took a deep breath, grabbed a crumpled piece of paper from the bench beside him, and stood up slowly. He didn't walk with attitude, he walked like every step cost him something. As he approached the podium, I noticed his hands were shaking, not from anger but from nerves. He looked tired, older than the age listed on his file. I decided right then and there that I wasn't going to rush this. I wanted to hear him. He gripped the sides of the wooden podium tightly, his knuckles turning white, as if he were holding on to the edge of a cliff. I asked him to state his name for the record. "Mark," he said, his voice cracking slightly before he cleared his throat and tried again. "Mark Miller, Your Honor." He didn't look up. He kept his eyes fixed on the file in front of me, waiting for the bad news he was sure was coming. I looked down at the documents. It wasn't just one ticket, it was a stack of them. 5 parking citations, all from the same week, all in a downtown loading zone. The total fines with late fees added on came to nearly $500. In this room, $500 means different things to different people. To some, it's an inconvenience, a check written with a sigh of annoyance. But looking at Mr. Miller, at the dust on his boots, the calluses on his hands, and the exhaustion etched into the lines around his eyes, I knew that $500 might as well have been $1 million. It was a mountain. and he looked like a man who had run out of climbing gear. "Mr. Miller," I said gently, breaking the silence, "I see 5 tickets here, all issued within a few days of each other. Can you tell me what was happening that week?" He shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. He didn't want to make excuses. I could see that pride in him, the kind of pride that makes it hard to ask for help even when you're drowning. "I was working, Your Honor," he said quietly. "I do construction, drywall, painting, whatever needs doing. We had a job downtown, a renovation in one of those old buildings. There was no parking for the crew. The garage cost $30 a day. If I paid that, I wouldn't take home enough to make the trip worth it." He paused, swallowing hard. "I took a chance on the loading zone. I thought if I just ran out every 2 hours to move it, I'd be okay. But we got behind schedule on the drywall and I couldn't leave the site. I came out and the ticket was there. The next day I tried to park further away, but my tools, I can't carry them that far, so I risked it again." He looked up at me then, his eyes red-rimmed. "I wasn't trying to be a nuisance, Judge, I was just trying to work." I nodded slowly. This is the part of the law that feels heavy sometimes. The law says you can't park there, but life says you have to feed your family. It's a conflict that plays out in my courtroom every single day. I asked him, "Mr. Miller, do you live alone?" That question seemed to knock the wind out of him. His composure, which he had been fighting so hard to maintain, started to crack. He looked down at his hands again, rubbing his thumb over a scar on his knuckle. "No, sir," he whispered. "It's just me and my 2 boys. Their mom, she left about 2 years ago. It's just us now." The room went quiet. You could hear the hum of the ventilation system, the rustle of paper, but no one spoke. Being a single parent is the hardest job in the world. Being a single parent while working manual labor, living paycheck to paycheck, trying to be both mother and father while worrying about keeping a roof over their heads, that is a level of pressure most people can't imagine. "How old are they?" I asked. 6 and 9, he answered. A faint, sad smile touched his lips for a split second. "They're good kids, they really are, but they need things, you know. School shoes, lunch money. The oldest one needs glasses. That week I took the job downtown because it paid cash at the end of the day. I needed that cash for the glasses." His voice trembled on the word glasses. That was the moment I knew he wasn't just a man with unpaid tickets. He was a father who had made a calculated risk for his son's eyesight, and he had lost. The fines on my desk weren't just a penalty for parking. They were the cost of those glasses. They were the grocery budget for the month. They were the rent. I leaned back in my chair. I wanted to give him a moment. I could see the panic rising in his chest. He started to apologize again, talking faster this time. "I know I have to pay it. I know I broke the rules. I brought $50 today. It's all I have on me. But I can try to get on a payment plan. I don't want to lose my license. If I lose my license, I can't get to the job sites. If I can't work..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. We both knew how that sentence ended. If he couldn't work, everything fell apart. I watched him struggle to breathe through the panic. This wasn't a criminal standing before me. This was a man terrified that a piece of paper was going to destroy the fragile life he had built for his sons. I signaled to Christina to hand me the full file. I wanted to see everything. I wanted to know if this was a pattern of negligence or a snapshot of desperation. As I opened the folder, Mr. Miller put his hand over his eyes, trying to hide the tears that were starting to spill over. He whispered, "I'm so sorry, I'm just so tired." I've heard that word tired more times than I can count. But when a grown man stands in a public courtroom surrounded by strangers and police officers and admits he is tired, he isn't talking about needing a nap. He's talking about a weariness that goes down to the soul. He's talking about the weight of waking up every day knowing that no matter how hard you work, the hole you're in just keeps getting deeper. It's the exhaustion of trying to be the hero for your children while feeling like a failure inside. I signaled for the bailiff to hand him a tissue. Mark took it with a shaking hand, wiping his face quickly, trying to regain the dignity he felt he had lost. But he hadn't lost it. In fact, standing there fighting for his family, he had more dignity than most people I see all day. "Mr. Miller," I said, my voice soft but firm enough to cut through the tension in the room. "Look at me. You don't need to apologize for being human. You don't need to apologize for loving your children." He looked up, his eyes swollen. He looked like he was waiting for the but you still broke the law. But you still have to pay. That's what life had taught him to expect. That compassion always came with a catch. I wanted to understand the full picture. You mentioned your son's glasses, I said. Did you get them? Did you make enough that week to buy them? Mark nodded, a small, painful pride breaking through his distress. Yes, Your Honor, I got them on Friday. He put them on and looked at the trees in the park. He told me he could see the individual leaves. He'd never seen the leaves before. He just thought trees were green blurs. He let out a ragged breath. It was the best money I ever spent. But then I came home and saw the notices in the mail and I realized I might have fixed his eyes, but I broke everything else. I leaned forward. You didn't break everything else, Mark. You made a choice. You chose your son over a parking regulation. Now, the law says you can't park in a loading zone. That's black and white. It's there to keep traffic moving, to keep commerce flowing. I have a duty to uphold that. But I also have a duty to fairness. And fairness asks a different question. It asks, is justice served by taking money from a man who is already giving everything he has? I looked at the stack of tickets again. $500 for the city. That money pays for a few hours of streetlights or a pothole repair. For Mark, that $500 was the difference between stability and chaos. It was food. It was gas. It was the fear of a knock on the door. Tell me about your work, I continued. You said you do drywall. That's hard work. It's hard on the back, hard on the knees. You do that every day? Every day there's work, sir, he answered. Some weeks are good, some weeks the phone doesn't ring. That's why I couldn't turn down the downtown job. When the foreman calls, you go. If you say no, they call the next guy and they might not call you again. I couldn't risk that. I listened to him and I thought about my own father again. I thought about the days he came home with dust on his clothes, smelling of hard labor and determination. He did it for us. He did it so we wouldn't have to. And I wondered, if my father had stood before a judge in a moment of desperation, what would I have wanted for him? Would I have wanted a lecture on municipal codes? Or would I have wanted someone to see the man beneath the dust? The courtroom was silent. I glanced at Inspector Quinn, the police officer who usually presents the cases. He's a tough guy, seen it all. But even Quinn was looking down at his paperwork, shifting uncomfortably. He knew. We all knew. This wasn't a case about parking, this was a case about survival. Mr. Miller, I asked, if I were to enforce these fines today, what would happen? Be honest with me. Mark looked at me and the fear in his eyes was absolute. I don't have it, Judge, I just don't. If I pay the $50 I brought, I can't buy groceries for the week. If you suspend my license, I can't get my tools to the next site. I lose the work. If I lose the work, his voice dropped to a whisper, I don't know how I keep the apartment. I'm terrified, Your Honor, I'm just terrified. Terrified. That word hung in the air long after he whispered it. I sat there for a moment, just letting the weight of his honesty sink into the wood of the bench. You see, the judicial system is often viewed as a machine. It is designed to process input, violation, output, punishment. It relies on codes, statutes, and fee schedules. It doesn't inherently have a heart. It doesn't have eyes to see that the man standing in front of it isn't defying the law, but is being crushed by it. But I am not a machine, and this courtroom isn't a factory. I looked over at Inspector Quinn. He's a good man, a tough officer, but a family man first. I saw him subtly shake his head, looking at the floor, tapping his pen against his notebook. He knew. We all knew. If I followed the strict letter of the law right now, I wouldn't just be issuing a fine. I would be pushing a family off a cliff. I would be taking the tools out of a man's hands and the food out of his children's mouths. I leaned forward, resting my chin on my hand. Mark, I said, dropping the formality of Mr. Miller for a moment. Take a breath. You are not going to lose your license today. Let's start with that. His head snapped up. The relief that washed over his face was physical. His knees actually buckled slightly, and he had to grab the podium to steady himself. Thank you, he gasped. Oh, God, thank you. But I want to talk about something else, I continued, my voice quiet. I want to talk about Leo and Sam. Those are their names? Yes, Your Honor. Leo is the oldest, the one with the glasses. Sam is the little one. Leo and Sam, I repeated slowly. When you go home tonight, Mark, what were you planning to tell them? He choked up, his hand going to his chest. I don't know. I was hoping I wouldn't have to tell them anything. I was hoping I could just fix it. I didn't want them to know their dad was standing in front of a judge. I want them to look at me and see someone strong. Fix it. That's the burden of every parent, isn't it? We want to be the shield. We want to fix the world so our children never feel the sharp edges of it. Mark had parked in that loading zone not because he was lazy or entitled, but because he was trying to fix his son's sight. He was trying to be the shield, and now he felt like the shield was cracking. I looked at the $50 bill he was still clutching in his trembling hand. It was crumpled, likely from being counted and recounted a dozen times that morning. That was his grocery money. That was the milk and bread and cereal for Leo and Sam. The city of Providence wanted that $50. The statute said the city was entitled to it. But my conscience was asking a louder question, a question that drowned out the statutes. Who needs that $50 more? The general fund of the city or two little boys waiting for their dad to come home? I spoke to the room then, addressing everyone in the gallery. We have a situation here where the rules of the city are colliding with the rules of survival. Mr. Miller is doing exactly what we want citizens to do. He is working. He is caring for his family. He is taking responsibility. He stood up here and said, "I did it." He didn't lie. He didn't blame the parking enforcement officer. He didn't try to weave a story, he just explained why. I turned back to him, looking him dead in the eye. "Mark, do you think you're a bad father?" He looked shocked. The question hit him harder than the fines. He hesitated, his voice barely a whisper. "I try not to be, Your Honor. I try so hard, but right now, standing here broke, begging, I feel like I'm failing them. I feel like I should be able to handle this without falling apart." "That," I said, pointing a finger at him gently, "is where you are wrong. You are not failing them." The room was so silent you could hear a pin drop. I wanted him to hear this. I wanted him to really hear it, not just as a defendant, but as a man. "You stood there," I said, "and you told me you risked your paycheck, your comfort, and even your legal standing to make sure your son could see the leaves on the trees. You prioritized his vision over your own safety. That is not the definition of a failure, Mark. That is the definition of a father." He broke. Then the dam finally burst. He covered his face with both hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. It wasn't the crying of a child. It was the weeping of a man who had been carrying the world on his back for 2 years without setting it down for a single second. I let him cry. I didn't rush him. The docket could wait. The city could wait. Sometimes dignity is restored just by letting a man grieve the difficulty of his own life without judgment. I watched him and I made a decision. Not a legal one, I had made that minutes ago, but a human one. I knew what I was going to do with the tickets, but I also knew that dismissing the tickets wasn't enough. The tickets were just the symptom. The disease was the despair, and I wanted to treat the disease. I watched him for a moment longer. There is a sacredness to a man's tears when they come from that place of deep sacrificial love. I didn't want to interrupt it, but I also didn't want him to suffer in that uncertainty for 1 second longer than necessary. I looked over at Inspector Quinn again. He gave me a barely perceptible nod, the kind of nod that says, "Do it, Judge, make this right." I reached for the gavel, but I didn't bang it. I just rested my hand on it, grounding myself. "Mark," I said softly, "listen to me closely now." He lowered his hands, his face wet, his eyes red and searching. He looked like a man waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for me to say, "I understand your pain, but the law is the law." Because that's what the world usually says. "Take that $50, I said, pointing to the crumpled bill in his hand, "and put it back in your pocket." He froze. He looked at the money, then back at me, confused. "Your Honor, but it's the down payment. It's all I have to start the plan." "I know it's all you have," I interrupted gently. "That is exactly why I don't want it. And the city of Providence doesn't want it either. If I take that $50, I am taking dinner out of Leo and Sam's mouths tonight. I am taking the gas money you need to get to your job tomorrow. That money belongs to your sons, Mark, not to the court." I picked up my pen and opened the file again. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was the only sound in the room. "Ticket number 1, I said aloud as I wrote. "Dismissed." I flipped the page. "Ticket number 2, dismissed." Mark's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. He watched my hand moving, stunned. "Ticket number 3, I continued, my voice steady. "Dismissed." "Ticket number 4, dismissed." I reached the last one, the final $100 violation that had likely kept him awake all night. And ticket number 5, dismissed. I closed the file with a definitive thud and looked up at him. "You don't owe us $500, Mark. You don't owe us $50. You owe us nothing. The case is closed." For a solid 10 seconds he didn't move. It was as if his brain couldn't process the sudden absence of the weight he had been carrying. He blinked rapidly, looking from me to Inspector Quinn, then down at his hands. I don't understand, he stammered. You mean it's gone? All of it? It's gone, I assured him. It's wiped clean. Your license is safe. Your record is clear. You can walk out of here and go straight to work without looking over your shoulder. That was the moment the relief hit him physically. His shoulders dropped 3 inches. The tension that had been holding his body in a rigid state of panic evaporated. He let out a long, shuddering breath, a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. "Oh my God," he whispered. Thank you, Judge. You have no idea. You have no idea what this means." "I think I do," I said. "I think everyone in this room does." I saw him start to fold the $50 bill, his hands shaking even harder now, but this time from adrenaline and gratitude. He went to put it in his pocket, then stopped. He looked at the money, then at me. "I was going to lose everything over this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was sitting there thinking about how I was going to tell the boys we might have to move. I was thinking about selling my tools." "You keep those tools," I told him firmly. "You use those tools to build a life for those boys. That is your job now. Your job isn't to worry about these tickets. Your job is to go home, hug Leo and Sam, and tell them their dad fought for them today." He nodded vigorously, wiping his face with his sleeve. "I will, I promise you I will." But I wasn't quite done. Dismissing the tickets solved the immediate legal problem. But as I looked at him, still dusty from work, still fragile from the stress, I knew there was something else that needed to be addressed. The money was one thing, but the spirit was another. He had walked in here feeling like a criminal, like a failure. I needed to make sure he walked out feeling like a man who had been restored. "Mark," I said, leaning forward again, "before you go, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." He straightened up, eager to answer whatever I asked. "Anything, Your Honor." "When was the last time you did something for yourself? Not for the boys, not for the job, for you." He blinked, confusion clouding his face again. He thought about it for a long time. Finally, he shook his head. "I don't remember, sir. Maybe before their mom left. I don't really have time for that. Everything goes to them." I nodded. That's the answer I expected. It's the answer of a parent who has completely erased themselves to keep their children whole. "That $50 in your pocket," I said. "I told you to keep it for the boys, but I want to amend that ruling just a little bit." He looked worried for a split second, clutching the bill tight. "I want you to take a small part of that," I said, smiling for the first time that morning. "Maybe just enough for a good cup of coffee or a sandwich that isn't from a gas station. And I want you to sit down for 10 minutes by yourself and breathe. Can you do that for me?" He looked down at the money, then up at me, a shy smile breaking through the tears. "A coffee," he repeated softly. "Yeah, I think I can do that." "Good," I said, "because you can't pour from an empty cup, Mark. You're doing a heavy job. You need to keep your strength up." I prepared to call the next case, but something in the atmosphere of the room stopped me. I could feel it in the gallery. People were leaning forward. Some were wiping their eyes. It wasn't just Mark who needed this outcome. We all needed it. We all needed to see that sometimes the system can actually work for the people, not against them. As Mark turned to step away from the podium, I saw him hesitate. He looked at the exit sign, then back at the bench, as if he still couldn't quite believe that he was free to walk through those doors without a debt hanging over his head. He looked lighter, yes, but he also looked like a man who had forgotten how to walk without a limp. The tickets were gone, but the bruising from the struggle was still there. I stood up. The movement caught everyone's attention. Usually when a case is dismissed, I simply call the next name. But my father's voice was in my ear again. "Frank, sometimes the ruling isn't the end of the job, sometimes it's just the start of the healing." I knew Mark needed one more thing. He needed to be treated not just with mercy, but with respect. "Mark," I called out before he could reach the aisle. "Wait just a second." He stopped and turned around, his eyes wide. "Yes, Your Honor." I stepped down from the bench. The courtroom murmured quietly. It's a rare thing for a judge to leave the elevated platform. That platform is there for a reason, to symbolize authority, objectivity, and separation. But in that moment, separation was the last thing we needed. I wanted to bridge the gap. I wanted to stand on the same level floor as him. I walked over to where he was standing. Up close, I could see the gray in his beard that probably shouldn't have been there at his age. I could smell the faint scent of drywall dust and saw the weariness in his posture. I extended my hand. "I want to shake your hand," I said. Mark looked at my hand, then at his own. He wiped his palm on his work pants, looking embarrassed. My hands are dirty, Judge. I came straight from the site. I don't care about the dust, I told him, keeping my hand out. That's honest dirt. That's the dust of a man taking care of his family. I'm honored to shake that hand. He reached out and took my hand. His grip was strong, calloused, rough like sandpaper, the hand of a builder. I held it firmly, looking him right in the eyes. I wanted him to feel the sincerity of this moment. I wasn't shaking the hand of a defendant. I was shaking the hand of a father who had gone into battle for his son's sight. You're a good man, Mark, I said, low enough that it was just between us, though the microphones likely picked it up. Don't let anyone, and I mean anyone, not a debt collector, not a boss, not even yourself, tell you otherwise. You are doing the most important work on earth. You are raising those boys. His chin trembled, and he squeezed my hand back hard. I'm trying, Judge, I'm really trying. I know you are, I said, and today the system saw you. We didn't just see the violation, we saw the victory. Go home to Leo and Sam, tell them the city of Providence is rooting for them. He nodded, unable to speak, and finally let go of my hand. As he walked down the center aisle toward the double doors, he walked differently. His head was up, his stride was longer. He wasn't skulking out hoping to be invisible. He was walking out like a citizen who belonged there. When the doors swung shut behind him, the room was incredibly quiet. I walked back up the steps to the bench and sat down. I took a sip of water, feeling the adrenaline of the moment start to fade into a warm, quiet satisfaction. I looked at Christina. She was smiling, wiping a tear from the corner of her eye. Inspector Quinn cleared his throat, looking unusually interested in the ceiling tiles. Inspector, I said, breaking the spell, are you okay over there? Quinn chuckled, a rough sound. I'm fine, Your Honor, just good call. That was a good call. It was the only call, I replied. But the day wasn't over. As I went through the next few cases, speeding tickets, expired registrations, my mind kept drifting back to Mark. I thought about the thousands of people just like him who pass through courtrooms all over this country every day. People living on the razor's edge where one parking ticket, one flat tire, or one sick day can start a domino effect that ruins a life. It made me realize something profound about the power of this seat. We call it the justice system, but often it feels more like a punishment system. If I had fined Mark $500, I would have followed the law perfectly. No appeals court would have overturned it, but I would have broken a family. Is that justice? Or is justice understanding that sometimes the rigid application of rules creates a deeper injustice? By the time we broke for lunch, I felt drained but lighter. I went back to my chambers and sat in my chair, staring out the window at the city streets below. I wondered where Mark was. I wondered if he was buying that coffee. I wondered if he was calling his kids. Then there was a knock on the door. It was Christina. She had a strange look on her face, half puzzled, half amazed. Judge, she said, you're not going to believe this. What is it? I asked, turning away from the window. A man just came to the clerk's window downstairs. He didn't have a case today. He was just watching the live stream of the proceedings on his phone while he ate lunch in his truck. I sat up straighter. Okay. He's a contractor, she continued, runs a big roofing company in the next town over. He saw Mark. He saw the uniform. He heard the story about the drywall in the parking garage. I felt a shiver go down my spine. And Christina smiled, holding up a piece of paper with a phone number scrawled on it. He wants Mark's contact info. He says he needs guys who show up even when things are tough. He says he has a job site that has free parking and he pays $25 an hour. Steady work. 40 hours guaranteed. I stared at the piece of paper. This is the part of the job that you can never predict. This is the ripple effect. Compassion is contagious. When you put goodness out into the world, it has a way of finding the people who need it most. Did we catch Mark? I asked, standing up. Did he leave? He's gone, Judge, Christina said. But we have his address on the file and we have his phone number. Call him, I said immediately. Call him right now. Tell him. Tell him his luck just changed again. Christina put the phone on speaker and dialed. I stood next to her desk, arms crossed, waiting. 1 ring, 2 rings. I could imagine Mark sitting in his truck, staring at the phone, wondering why the court was calling him back. Had we changed our minds? Was the dismissal a mistake? Hello? His voice was guarded, tight with renewed anxiety. Mr. Miller, Christina said, her voice bright and professional but warm. It's Christina from Judge Caprio's chambers. Don't worry, nothing is wrong. In fact, something is very right. She explained the call we had just received. She told him about the contractor, the job offer, the $25 an hour, and the guaranteed 40 hours a week. She gave him the contact information. For a long moment, there was only silence on the other end of the line. It stretched out so long I thought maybe the call had dropped. Then we heard a sound that I will never forget. It was a sharp intake of breath followed by a choked sob. Are you serious?" Mark asked, his voice trembling. "Is this real?" "It's very real, Mark," I said, leaning toward the speakerphone. "The community saw you today. They saw a man worth investing in." I don't know what to say," he stammered. "I went from thinking I was going to lose my livelihood to having a future. I can buy the groceries, I can fix the truck, I can tell Leo—" He broke off, overwhelmed. "Thank you. Please tell that man thank you. Tell him I won't let him down. I'll be the hardest worker he's ever seen." "We know you will," I said. "Good luck, Mark." We ended the call and the room felt charged with a kind of electricity that you don't find in law books. I looked at Christina. She was beaming. "This is why we broadcast these proceedings," I said. "Some people criticize it. They say court should be private. But I believe that when you shine a light on humanity, humanity shines back. That live stream didn't just expose Mark's struggle. It connected his struggle to someone else's capacity to help. It turned a moment of isolation into a moment of community." I went back to the bench to finish the afternoon session, but the energy had shifted. I felt it. The officers felt it. Even the other defendants seemed to feel it. There was a sense that this wasn't just a place of punishment. It was a place where things could actually get better. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine cases, but my mind kept returning to the image of Mark walking out those doors and then the phone call that changed his life. It made me think about the invisible threads that connect us all. A father parks in a loading zone to help his son see. A judge decides to listen instead of punish. A stranger watching on a phone miles away decides to offer a hand. And suddenly the trajectory of a family changes forever. When the final gavel went down at 4 p.m., I felt a deep, resonant tiredness. Not the bad kind, the good kind. The kind that comes from knowing you didn't just do your job, you did your duty as a human being. I went back to my chambers, took off my robe, and hung it on the hook. Underneath, I'm just Frank, a husband, a father, a grandfather. But that robe, it gives me the chance to be something else for a few hours a day. It gives me the chance to be a neighbor to people who have forgotten what it feels like to have one. I packed my briefcase slowly. The courthouse was quieting down, the cleaning crews were starting their rounds. I walked out to the parking lot, the evening sun slanting across the pavement. I got into my car and sat there for a minute before turning the key. I thought about Leo and Sam. Tonight their dad was coming home, not just with his tools, but with good news. Tonight there would be dinner on the table and no fear in the air. Let me pause here and ask you something personal. Have you ever been at the end of your rope thinking there was no way out, only to have a stranger step in and change everything? Or maybe you were the stranger who helped. I want to hear those stories. Leave me a comment below. We need to remind each other that goodness is still the strongest force in the world. Driving home, the city looked different to me. I drove past construction sites and wondered if any of those workers were single dads like Mark, worrying about school shoes and parking tickets. It reminds you to look at people with a little more grace. You never know what battle is being fought behind a tired face. When I got home, the house was warm and smelled of dinner. My wife met me at the door. She kissed my cheek and pulled back, looking at me closely. "You have that look," she said. "What look?" I asked, putting down my briefcase. "The look that says the world isn't completely broken," she smiled. "No," I said, thinking of Mark, of the contractor, of the $50 staying in his pocket. "No, it isn't, not today." We sat down to eat and I told her the whole story. I told her about the glasses, the loading zone, the breakdown. I told her about the job offer. She listened, her eyes misty. "That's wonderful, Frank," she said softly. "That's really wonderful." But the story didn't end there. You see, in this line of work, you often wonder what happens next. You dismiss a case, you offer encouragement, and the person walks out the door and vanishes back into the anonymity of the city. You hope they make it. You pray they stay on the right path, but you rarely get to know for sure. This time, however, was different. About 6 months later, it was close to Christmas. The docket was full of people trying to clear up fines before the holidays. The mood in the courtroom was a mix of festive stress and winter gloom. I was working through a stack of speeding tickets when I saw Inspector Quinn walk in. He He wasn't scheduled for court that day. He was off duty, wearing a thick coat and holding an envelope. He walked right up to the bench during a recess. "Judge," he said, grinning, "you got mail." "Mail?" I asked. "Put it with the rest, Inspector." "No," he said, shaking his head. "This one you need to open now. It was dropped off at the front desk, hand-delivered." I took the envelope. It was thick, heavy. There was no return address, just Judge Caprio written in neat, careful block letters. I opened it. Inside there was a card, and inside the card was a photograph. I pulled the photograph out of the envelope and held it up to the light. It was a picture of 3 people standing in front of a Christmas tree. In the center was Mark. But it wasn't the Mark I had seen 6 months ago, the man who was gray with exhaustion, dusty and trembling with fear. This Mark was smiling. He was wearing a clean, sturdy work jacket with the logo of the roofing company stitched on the chest. He looked filled out, healthy, and most importantly, he looked proud. Standing next to him were 2 young boys, Leo and Sam. Leo, the older one, was wearing a pair of thick-rimmed glasses, grinning ear to ear, giving a thumbs up to the camera. Sam was holding a toy truck, leaning against his dad's leg. They didn't look like children who were worried about where their next meal was coming from. They looked like children who felt safe. I flipped the card over. In that same careful handwriting, Mark had written a short note. "Dear Judge Caprio, I wanted you to see what you did. Not just for me, but for them. The job is hard, but it's good. The boss treats me with respect. We have a real Christmas tree this year, the first one in 3 years. And yes, I take 10 minutes every morning for a cup of coffee, just like you said. I sit in my truck. I watch the sun come up and I breathe. Thank you for not breaking me when you had the chance. You gave me my life back. Mark." I sat there for a long time just holding that card. My throat felt tight. In a job where you see so much struggle, so much recidivism, and so much sadness, a moment like this is fuel. It keeps you going for another year. It confirms everything I have ever believed about the purpose of this bench. I showed the picture to Inspector Quinn. He looked at it, then nodded slowly, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "Look at those kids," he said softly. "Look at those glasses." "Yeah," I said, "he can see the leaves." That photo sat on my desk for the rest of the holiday season. It was a reminder that the decisions we make in split seconds can echo for a lifetime. If I had followed the strict letter of the law that day, Mark would likely have lost his license. He would have lost the job opportunity. The family might have lost their home. Those boys certainly wouldn't be standing in front of a Christmas tree smiling. Instead, because we chose to listen, because a stranger on a live stream chose to help, and because Mark had the courage to be honest, 3 lives were stabilized. That is the ripple effect of compassion. It doesn't just stop at the person you help. It flows into their children, their work, and their community. So let me ask you one final question. When you look at the world today, do you think we need more strict enforcement of rules, or do we need more understanding of the people breaking them? Do you believe that a second chance can be more powerful than a penalty? I read every single comment you leave, and I really want to know your heart on this. If this story moved you, if seeing a father fight for his sons and win resonates with you, please hit that like button. It helps us share this message of humanity with more people. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. We have so many more stories like this. Stories from a courtroom where the gavel is used to heal, not just to punish. I'm Frank Caprio. I've spent a lifetime in this robe. And if I've learned one thing, it's this. The law is written on paper, but justice is written in the heart. Never be afraid to be the person who offers a hand instead of a judgment. You never know whose life you might be saving. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of this community. And remember, respect costs nothing, but it yields everything. God bless you.